Hello, my name is Peter Parfitt and welcome to the New Workshop. Now in this video I'm going to show you how to go about making a tray, and I think it's a rather nice tray because it uses two types of wood, contrasting colours, and they're put together in a rather neat way. Now this is a project you can do with just a router and some guide bushes so that you can do template routing. I've made a video about template routing and I'll put the link to it in the description of this video. Now all you need to do to make this tray is to get yourself guide bushes and also make a template, and the rest is just simple woodwork. And now let's see how this all started a couple of days ago. Right, we've now travelled back in time, and at this stage I don't know whether any of this is going to work, but I think you've seen the finished result already. Anyway, what I'm doing is, first of all, I'm going to produce the template. Here's a piece of wood that the template's going to be made from, and I've got a piece of cardboard, and I'm going to use this to create my pattern. And in order for my pattern to be symmetrical, I'm only going to do half of it, fold it over, cut it, and then transfer it to the piece of wood here. And what I've done here is I've marked out the width of my finished tray. Not the length, the width, and I've taken account just here and here of the side pieces that will be going fore and aft, and I know how much the drop will be for the handle, so I'm now going to draw this line, and I've got to make this really as smooth as my eye can judge. Now, one of the good things about this technique is that it's very forgiving, because you've done a curve like that, and we then fold it over and cut it. We then take it over to the template piece of wood, and then we sand it down a bit, and in all of that process it does tend to reduce the number of sort of idiosyncrasies, if you like. Anyway, so there that is. I'm now going to fold this along my centre line. I'm going to do it really carefully. Now, I've done this as accurately as I can. I'm now taking this, it's a smooth piece of metal, just to really make that crease nice and solid. And I'm now going to cut that with a pair of scissors. And I now can transfer this to my piece of wood. And now what I need to do is cut this out and then smooth it off with a sander. Now you could cut this out either on a bandsaw, as I'm about to do, or with a jigsaw. Well, there that is. It doesn't look terribly clever, but I'm going to smooth this top bit out with the sander, and I'll use my eye to judge that. And so we'll go with that. Good. And do remember to use a centering mandrel when you're putting in guide bushes. In fact, in this case, it's only when you're putting in the plate that the guide bushes fit into. And the guide bushes I'm using are the UJK threaded guide bushes, and this is the metric set. I've had them for years, bought them a long time ago, and I love them. And my setup here is fairly straightforward. I will be putting a 4mm cutter in the router in a minute. Now here's my template, and my template is longer than the wood that it's going to be used against, so I can put a screw on each side to hold it in place, and by having that screw there the router has free travel over the whole of that surface. Now I don't know if you can see my little bit of scribbled writing here, but I'm going to be making the light coloured wood piece here, which is the handle, and the end of, or the two ends of the trays, is this other piece here. And I've looked very carefully at my own notes, and I'm using the router template sheet that I produced a long time ago. It's available if you ask me for it. It's the offset sheet, and I know that the top piece here will be done as a plug, and so will the top of this piece be done as a plug, and the underside of the handle gets done as a hole. I've got a sacrificial piece of wood here. This is one of the two pieces of wood that I'll be using to cut the top handles from. And what I've done is I've put the template against here and I've drawn the outline of where the cutting will take place. And that way means I can now trim this with the bandsaw to get rid of the majority of the material. So that's the rough cut done. Right, and those screws are below the surface of my template. As I've got a small cutter in here, a 4mm cutter, I'm going to just go down about 5mm at a time. And now I've got to change the guide bush for the next one in, because that one was a plug setting and the guide bush for the hole is 10mm rather than 18. So got to get that right. Right, I've now put the 10mm guide bush in and I've adjusted my template down and I've moved it actually down by 10mm, and I think in theory that means I'm going to get about a just over 3mm piece that comes free. So let's give it a go. Set out to have about a 10mm thickness to this, and I think it's too much. So I think I'm going to reduce it. I've made that adjustment and I think this should be okay this time. Yeah, and I think that's much better, so I'll continue like that. It looks neater. Yep, good. Now, I should have mentioned this, that when you're doing this with the one on the underside, you've got to really make sure you have the guide bush against the template, because it's too easy for it to wander off in that direction. Right, that's the first one done. Now with my particular setup, when I move the template down, having changed from the 18mm guide bush to the 10mm one, using a 4mm cutter, I need to go down a distance of 5.5mm. And that then gives me a 5.5mm piece, which I'm going to use for the tray. That's that bit done. There's just one minor issue I've got, and that is my 4mm cutter isn't actually quite long enough to cut this material, and when it goes down to its full depth, it's leaving a slight underscore here. So I've got to take that into account. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plane this off and make this just slightly thinner. So I've done that little operation, and this is the side where I had the marks, and they're gone now. Now I'm just in the process of cutting some little thin pieces which will go on top of the sides. I've not got the main dust collector and guard on here because I'm cutting such thin strips, but the baby riving knife is there and I'm being very careful. Those are my two thin strips that go on the sides, cut from the same piece of wood that I've made the curved bits from. Right, I now have to cut the shape for the main end pieces, and that's pieces which these bits will be glued onto. And I've changed my guide bush now back to the 18mm one. I've screwed my template through my piece of stock and onto my sacrificial board, and I'm now going to do this cut. And it's going to be the similar process that I did before. So I'm going to do this one and the other end one, and then we'll be ready to stick these pieces on. And there's that piece ready to have that other piece stuck on. Now, in order to make sure my template is square on the piece of wood, what I've done is I've used this rear edge as my reference edge when I've created the template. So I know that the shape here is uniform to this edge. And what I've done is I've put a pencil line here and on the other end at the same distance from this line, and I'm using that to line up the template on my piece of stock. And you can see I've done it in other places as well. So it's quite a useful way of doing it. Get both ends lined up. Yep, that's fine. Tighten that up, and then I'm going to drill, then put my screws in. So I can remove the clamp, and that gives me now a clear top here for the router. And I hope you noticed that this was a relatively dust-free operation. There's no clouds of dust in the workshop. Now I'm just going to cut these pieces out. I'm cutting them slightly on the long side. And these are the two pieces that go on the top. Fingers crossed they fit. That's just placed on there, and I hope you can see there's no air gap at all. Well, it's time to glue these pieces on now, and so what I've done is I've very carefully made sure I've got them the right way around. I've marked everything with a little L for left, R for right on there, and I've got the same on these pieces of wood. Now I'm going to carefully put glue along here, and you can't really use clamps on a curved surface very easily or effectively, but masking tape is brilliant. Now, I like to apply glue to both surfaces, and the reason for that is that the glue will be absorbed into the surface before you start bringing the two parts together, and I think it's probably better to let that process take place with the pieces separated. And I must tell you that, I know you can't see it at the moment, this is a beautiful fit. And I'm going to start in the middle, pushing down really hard, checking that it's in the right place, yep. And then at the end here, pressing down really hard, checking that's okay, yep. And at the end, down really hard. Right, so I'm pleased with that, and I hope that you can see just how good this is. Now, I haven't filmed it, but I used another template which I made to cut a pair of identical handholds in these end pieces. Now, I'm just putting the finishing touches to these end pieces, and I'm going to round over the inside of the hole where the fingers go on both sides, and also each side of the top. And I'll do the same with the side pieces when we come to finish those, and then everything will match. Now, I'm using a rounding over cutter. It's one from Axminster. It's absolutely super. It came in a set of 4, and it's got a ball bearing guide here, and I've set it up so it's just at the right height. Now, the thing you've got to watch is remembering which direction to push your stock past the cutter, and the outside pieces here will come like this and like that. Now, when we come to do the inside of the hole, we've got to make sure that the stock is going past the cutter just like this, as it was before. So we're going to be going in that direction and then round here in that direction. So that direction and around. So you're effectively turning this piece of wood clockwise. And that's both of those done. I've got a little bit of warming up of the wood there. That could be sorted out with a bit of sandpaper. So I'm very pleased with that. These are quite nice handles. And the way I've done it is such that the piece of oak, which is at the top here, is actually reinforcing the wood below, because I was worried that if I just made a hole like this in the mahogany, with a heavy tray full of super duper summer drinks, it could break here and here. But I think with that oak like that, 2 pieces, that's going to be very, very strong. Now I'm going to cut the sides now to their final width. For this long side pieces, I'm going to cut it out of this stock. And in order to judge it, I've put this in here against the blade and then moved the fence accordingly. So that's going to cut something which is exactly right. Now, you may think it odd, but I'm going to put Poly-X on all these bits and pieces before I go any further. And the rationale is as follows. When I do the gluing, I don't want any glue to stain the pieces of wood. So if I put Poly-X on these pieces now, before I cut the miters, where the glue is going, and before I cut the channel, where the base is going, then there is a pretty good chance then all of the excess glue, which there's bound to be, will be easy to clean off. And probably the easiest way to put a thin coat of Poly-X on everything is to use one of these non-abrasive scourers. And you can get these from places like Axminster and so on. They're normally coloured white. In fact, all the ones I've ever seen have been white. At the very end, just rub off the excess, rubbing with the grain. And this is very important because this makes the Osmo dry very quickly. It also makes it very smooth. All my pieces are virtually finished, ready for the cutting of the miters. But before I do that, I'm going to cut the channel for the base. Now, one thing that I've just done now is I've put a rounding over edge on the inside edge of the bottom. I've got a 1/4 inch cutter in here. My base is just over that, so I'll have to make a very slight adjustment. I've marked up which side to do all these things. Now, if you've not seen this before, I've got a very simple V groove there, which I did with a 90-degree V cutter on the router table. This piece of wood is then mounted with a handle, and you've got the ability of doing, as you've just seen there, putting sideways pressure and a little bit of top pressure on a piece of wood going through the router table. So I'm now ready to cut the miters. I'm going to do those on the Capex, and I'm going to do it really carefully because this is where things can go badly wrong if you have a duff miter. I'm all set up. I've got my saw at 45 degrees. I'm using the laser on a pencil line that I've got, and I'm going to take this very, very carefully. Now, I've just checked the miter. It's absolutely at right angles there, and I can only assume that the other is at 45 degrees. I'm sure it is. Well, that's now all the miters cut. Hey! That's the base cut to size. Now I can start the gluing. Hey! And just to check my base size, I've just pushed it together. There's no glue and I haven't finished the little tiny bits of sanding yet, but that's what it's going to look like in a few minutes' time. Now, just before I start the glue up, I want to point something out to you, and it might be really difficult to see, but this piece of wood for the base was left over from that job when I was amending those drawers, which I did recently, the kitchen drawers. And there were 2 screw holes, and I was worried that they might show. One of them is just there. And what I've done is I filled it with sort of oak-coloured filler, and then I used a brown crayon to carry the grain lines through or over the top of that bit of filler. So it really doesn't show. And there is another one just there. Anyway, I'm getting ready for the glue up, and the way this is going to happen is obviously I'm going to put glue all round because this is a piece of man-made board, so it's not going to change shape or size in any way, so I'm not worried about that. I'm going to put glue all round, glue on the miters. I'm then going to use my folding technique for getting all the bits together, and that's using masking tape, and that's the bit that you start with before you put the glue in. I have my straight edge here. Now, I've shown this technique many times, so I'm not going to go into any detail with it. And I'm now going to put glue in all the appropriate places. And I see I've got a tiny bit of glue just there. And the beauty of having put that bit of Osmo on at the beginning means it's easy to wipe excess glue off. So I'm going to very carefully get this piece in place. I'm trying to get it even as far as left and right goes. That one's in okay, and then up comes this one, up comes this one, then I'm going to turn it round so I can get this bit in, and now what I need to do now is to squeeze this up a little bit. I can squeeze it in lengthwise using a clamp like this. You don't want to tighten these up too much at this stage. So at this stage, I'm getting these so these just hold themselves in place on the workpiece, and then I'm going to put the ones that go across. I'm squeezing this all the way along because if there's any slight tightness where the base fits into those channels, then it needs a bit of encouragement. And sometimes when you do a glue up like this, if you're not careful, you might get a long side bowing because it hasn't quite squeezed all the way in where it should go. Right, that seems to be pretty much together as it should be. What I'm now going to do is just check for square. Absolutely spot on. Absolutely spot on. I'm happy with that. Now I'm going to let the glue go off for about 10 minutes and then I'm going to wipe the excess off. And the reason why I leave it for those few minutes is when the glue starts to solidify, it's very easy to get it off. It sort of almost comes off in one piece. Right, at the moment of truth now, I'm going to take off the clamps and clear off that excess glue. Now, in order to get into these little places in the corners, I've got a part of an old credit card and I can use this to get down really nice and close in to get the tiny bit of glue out from in there. Well, I'm very pleased with that, bearing in mind the glue's only had probably about 15 or 20 minutes now. I'm happy with that, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put a tiny bit of filler. There's a couple of tiny little gaps, very, very minor, then leave everything to dry, and then I have to give it a nice gentle sand and then lots of Osmo. Well, that's it, it's finished, and it's had its couple of coats of Osmo and it's ready for action. I better invite some friends round. Many thanks for watching, take care, bye bye.